So today we are talking about a banned book that reveals that God is not only the worst sinner, but the first sinner. So what is this sin that what is this sin that God committed? And what does it have to do with us? We're diving into this book known as The Reality of the Rulers, or The Hypostasis of the Archons. And this is a book that was once banned by the church. It's a Gnostic text that describes the dark archons, the creators of this world, and reveals that the creator of the earth, God, the God that is worshipped by billions today, is actually the first and worst sinner. So we're going to be taking a look at that. What is this sin that God committed? What does it have to do with us? Is God experimenting with us? What does it have to do with our place in the cosmos and our destiny? It's going to be good. That's what we're talking about today. We're going to jump right into it. Now, before I do, just make sure that you like and subscribe. Help spread this information around. It's important to raise consciousness. Also, if you enjoy my work, you want to support this channel and see my content grow and help me reach more people and create bigger and better videos, support over on Patreon. It's the best way to support my work, and you get access to all of our members-only videos. And there's a new one every single week. In fact, there's a new members-only video coming out right after this one, all about the secret of sleep. Why do we sleep? What is sleep? What does it have to do with consciousness? What are dreams? So support at any tier on Patreon or tier 2 or higher right here on YouTube by hitting the join button to support and get access to all of our members-only videos. Also, be aware that there are scammers out there pretending to be me. I see them a lot in the comments, and they even DM people on different social media platforms, usually telling people to join Telegram or WhatsApp or something like that. That's not me. Don't fall for it. They're a bunch of scammers. Also, there are people in groups out there who don't like what I'm doing and who don't like what we are doing and are spreading a lot of misinformation and disinformation about me and our group and what we do. So just be on the lookout for that. Use your logic and reason. Don't fall for the bullshit. All right, here we go, my friends. We're taking a look at this banned Gnostic text, banned by the church, once banned by the church, called The Reality of the Rulers, or The Hypostasis of the Archons. We've been talking a lot about archons lately, and if you're not familiar with what those are, the archons are essentially the dark beings that created the world. This is what Gnosticism describes as the rulers of this dark world that created the earth and created human bodies, and are essentially using humans as slaves in a certain way, using souls to power their dark creation of matter. We've been talking a lot about archons lately, so I thought this was a really good time to take a look at this book, which is an excellent book, one of my favorite Gnostic texts. I wouldn't say my very favorite, but definitely up there, one of the contenders. And we're going to jump right into it and also ask the question, if God is a sinner, should God be held accountable for these sins? Should there be a punishment for this God? So we're going to take a look at this right now, and I'll bring it up on screen so that you can see it right here. This is The Reality of the Rulers, or The Hypostasis of the Archons. Now, this is one of the banned Gnostic texts that was discovered in 1945, buried near the tombs of Egypt. People ask me all the time, where can I read these? You can read them all for free on gnosis.org. That's what this is right here. That's gnosis, GNOSIS.org. It's a great website and has all of the Nag Hammadi texts, all the texts that were discovered near Egypt, available to read for free. So go check it out. It's a great website. Highly recommended. So we're going to start off right here. And it says, on account of the reality of the authorities. Now, when they say authorities, they mean the rulers. They mean the archons. And it says, on account of the reality of the authorities, by the Spirit of the Father of Truth, the great apostle, referring to the authorities of the darkness, told us that our contest is not against flesh and blood, rather the authorities of the universe and the spirit of the wickedness. I have sent this to you because you inquire about the reality of the authorities. So this is a message being sent revealing the reality of the rulers, or the hypostasis of the archons. And it's interesting that they're using this verse about our contest is not against flesh and blood, rather against the authorities of the universe and the spirits of wickedness. Now, this is usually used in Christianity, and Orthodox Christianity and mainstream Christianity today, to refer to demons and Satan. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and spirits of darkness. This is the verse. I grew up in a strict Christian household. I grew up indoctrinated into Christianity, for those who don't know. This is a verse that's very commonly spoken about to reveal the fact that there are demons and dark forces trying to get us to sin and trying to tempt us. However, as you'll see in this Gnostic text, they associate these archons, these authorities, these dark forces with God and his angels, or what Christianity, modern Christianity, interprets as God as the angels. So according to Gnosticism, these dark forces, these dark archons, these dark entities are the ones that are ensnaring us and entrapping us, and is associated with the God of what would become the Bible, the Creator God, and his servants, his archons. And so you see in Orthodox Christianity, it's about, oh, the devil and the demons are trying to tempt you and get you to sin. Rather, in Gnosticism, that's not what's happening at all. It's saying that these dark beings are trying to keep you ensnared in ignorance from understanding what you are. So you see there's a big difference here. Modern Christianity is about, oh, these demons trying to tempt you and get you to sin. Gnosticism is saying, no, what this is about, these dark forces are trying to keep you locked in ignorance. Because Gnosticism is all about gnosis, which comes from the Greek word knowledge. So Gnosticism is about knowledge versus ignorance, not sin and salvation. Modern Christianity, sin and salvation. Gnostic, esoteric texts and the system itself is about ignorance versus knowledge. And we see this here where they're talking about the reality of the rulers, the reality of the archons as being the dark forces that keep us ensnared in ignorance. Now it says, their chief is blind. And when they say the chief is blind, they're talking about the Creator God, the God of this world, the God who, according to Gnosticism, is the chief archon. And one of the names, this being goes by many different names. They call this being Yaldabaoth, Nibro, Saklas, Samael, many different names. And one of the names given to this being is Samael, which means the blind God. So they look at this God as being a blind God, meaning an ignorant God, a foolish God, and also a God that keeps others in ignorance as well, in darkness. Now, in modern Christianity, we know what they think that the first and original sin is. What's the first and original sin in modern Christianity? The first and original sin in modern Christianity is eating from the tree of knowledge. Now, do you see right there how nefarious that is? The entire construction of Christianity is built on the platform that humanity is sinful because of the first sin, and that first sin that threw all of humanity into a dirty, sinful state requiring salvation is eating from the tree of knowledge. Now, do you see how nefarious it is to make the worst sin, the first sin, to be associated with attaining knowledge? That's what modern Christianity says is the first sin. And it's used to keep humanity blinded and in ignorance and in fear of light and knowledge. Not only that, but they use it as a mode to subjugate women as well. Because in the New Testament, it said that Eve is the one who ate from the tree. And because Eve is the one who ate from the tree, they have to learn in quietness and submission and submit to their husbands and aren't allowed to teach, but they can be saved through childbirth. So this verse or this first sin has been used to not only keep humanity subjugated, but particularly has been used as a way to subjugate women as well. So, according to modern mainstream Christianity, eating from the tree of knowledge is the first worst sin that all of us are infected with. It doesn't matter if you don't commit any sin your entire life. According to Christianity, you are infected with that original sin, and you are required to have salvation to be able to avoid hell. Even if you're a perfect person, it doesn't matter, because you are infected with that original sin of eating from the tree of knowledge that was perpetrated by Adam and Eve. But Gnosticism, not so much. Gnosticism is the complete opposite of that. Gnosticism, in fact, says that it's not Adam and Eve who committed the first and worst sin, but God that committed the first and worst sin. And what is that sin? We're going to be finding out exactly what that is and what it has to do with us and our nature. Because one of the things here that is so indicative of Gnosticism is this idea of the archons trying to keep us in ignorance, trying to keep us away from knowledge of what we are. And talking about the chief ruler, the head archon, God, the book says, his thoughts, talking about the creator God, his thoughts became blind, and having expelled his power, he pursued it down to the chaos and the abyss. And Pistis Sophia, his mother, because in this version of the story in Gnosticism, God is actually birthed from an eon known as Sophia. So there are much higher beings than God. God is this archon is a being of shadow, a being of darkness. Beings of light exist called eons. We talked a lot about this in previous streams. Check out my playlist on the tripartite tractate if you really want to know the difference between eons and archons and what they are. But essentially, it says, and she established each of his offspring in conformity with its power after the pattern of the realms that are above. For by starting from the invisible world, the visible world was invented. So this actually has the idea of as above, so below within it. This idea of the visible world reflects the patterns of the invisible world or the spiritual realm. The material realm reflects the spiritual realm. So this has to do with the idea of as above, so below, in that it is a reflection or a shadow. We can also understand this in terms of Plato's domain of forms. So Plato, the Greek philosopher, had the philosophy that the material world was just an illusion and a shadow. The true realm was a realm of forms, which were sort of like divine perfect blueprints from which everything in the material world depended on for its existence. Just like a shadow can't exist in isolation, something has to cast a shadow. So the material world cannot exist in isolation, but rather depends on the patterns of the invisible realm. Now, it says, as incorruptibility looked down into the regions of the waters, her image appeared in the waters, and the authorities of the darkness became enamored of her. But they could not lay hold of that image, which had appeared to them in the waters, because of their weakness, since beings that merely possess a soul cannot lay hold of those that possess a spirit. For they were from below, while it was from above. That is the reason why incorruptibility looked down into the region, so that by the Father's will she might bring the entirety into the union with the light. Okay, now this is very important to know when we're exploring this sin that God committed, this first and worst sin that is related to what existence is and what reality is. And this is important. It says, so understanding this sentence here, so that by the Father's will she might bring the entirety into union with the light. So let's talk about this. This is very important. So in Gnosticism, when they say the Father's will, they're not talking about the God of the Bible, because the God of the Bible is the being of darkness, Yaldabaoth, Samael, the blind God. Rather, the Father represents the mind of divine light. So in Gnosticism, this is called the One, or the Holy Invisible Spirit. And the One is a mind of divine light from which all reality emanates. Everything is ultimately an emanation from this mind of divine light, or is dependent on one of its emanations. And so what this is saying here, it says that so that by the Father's will, she might bring the entirety into union with the light. So this is all very important. Who is the she that we're talking about? The she that we're talking about is Sophia. Who is Sophia? Sophia is the eon of wisdom, the being of light that represents wisdom. Sophia means wisdom. So it says, so that by the Father's will, she, wisdom, might bring the entirety, all reality, into union with the light. So essentially what this is saying is that through wisdom, wisdom will bring all reality, all of us, all of existence, all the material world, into union, back into union with the light, because it has been disconnected from the light. It's darkness and shadow. So via wisdom, one can attain union with all reality, all existence, all light. Now, this is important here when we understand this sin that God committed. So, which I'll talk about in a minute, but we have to see this preliminary information first. So, it says, the rulers laid plans and said, come, let us create a man that will be soil from the earth. And they modeled their creature as one wholly of the earth. So they're deciding to create a human being. They're trying to create life. And it says, they had taken some soil and the earth and molded their man after their body and after the image of God that had appeared to them in the waters. So what they're doing is that they are creating a human being, and they're creating this human being in two different ways. One, via the image of themselves, in their image, and also in the image of God that they saw in the waters. Now, when it says the image of God that they saw in the waters, it doesn't mean the creator God, Yaldabaoth. It means the One, the Father. So they're creating it in their image, based on matter and darkness, but also in tandem constructing it and modeling it after the image of the pure divine realm of light and the entire God, the Father, the Holy Invisible Spirit, the One. So they said, come, the archons, the rulers, come, let us lay hold of it by means of the form that we have molded, so that it may see its male counterpart, and we may seize it with the form that we have modeled. Not understanding the force of God because of their powerlessness. And he breathed into his face, and the man came to have a soul, and remained upon the ground many days. But they could not make him arise because of their powerlessness. Like storm winds, they persisted in blowing, that they might try to capture that image which had appeared to them in the waters, and they did not know the identity of its power. So essentially what's going on here is that they tried to create this being, they tried to create this entity, they tried to create it, but it's basically laying there and it's not moving. They can't get it to have life. They can't get it to become animated or become sentient or have a subjectivity. It's basically just an inanimate body that they have created because they don't have the power to give it. Now, in different Gnostic texts, there's different ways that this being ends up becoming actually animate. In some Gnostic texts, it is actually the force of life from the divine realm, known as Eve. So Eve is actually a divine entity that gives Adam life. So in some Gnostic texts, it's Eve that gives Adam life. Eve as being a divine being known as Zoe or Zoe, meaning life. Eve, Zoe, different names for the same being, giving Adam life. In other Gnostic texts, Yaldabaoth has some light within itself. It's a dim ruler, a shadowy ruler, a ruler of light and darkness, and so breathes some of its light into this body to get it to become animate. Now, but according to this book, it says here, now all these things came to pass by the will of the Father of the entirety. Afterwards, the Spirit saw the soul-endowed man upon the ground, and the Spirit came forth from the adamantine land. It descended and came to dwell within him, and that man became a living soul. It called his name Adam, so he was found moving upon the ground. A voice came forth from the incorruptibility for the assistance of Adam, and the rulers gathered together all the animals of the earth and all the birds of the heaven and brought them to Adam to see what Adam would call them, and that he might give a name to each of the birds and the beasts. So we understand this. We've heard this Bible story before. This is, of course, from a completely different perspective in Adam, being created and then naming all the animals. Now, it's very interesting here that what's going on is that this body was inanimate, but then spirit from the divine light entered this body and began to animate it. And now there's a lot of Gnostic texts that say different things about what happens here, but essentially the main idea that's common to most of these is that these archons are creating these bodies essentially to trap souls. And in one of the Gnostic texts, it says that they had Adam name the animals to sort of test him to see how smart he was. Now, the problem is that this being, this human, actually has the potential to be more powerful than the archons and Yaldabaoth and the God of the Bible. And the reason why that it has the potential to be more powerful is because it comes from the realm of divine light. So essentially, and this is where this is all going to wrap around and connect here, is that this being and the archons in general are trying to keep humanity in ignorance of what it is because it has the power to become more powerful because it is divine. So in essence, all humans have the divine within them because it comes from the realm of divine light, and the archons are constantly engaged in a mission to keep humanity in ignorance and keep humanity in blindness. Samael, the blind god, is himself blind, but also keeps humanity in blindness as well. And so what we reveal here, when we understand the idea that the first sin, according to modern Christianity, is the sin of knowledge, because remember, the serpent says that if you eat from the tree of knowledge, you will become like God. And that's the whole idea here, is that when you attain knowledge, you will understand your own divinity. And in Gnosticism, eating from the fruit is not a sin, but rather a step towards understanding what one truly is, a step towards gnosis, a step towards knowledge. And so we have Yaldabaoth attempting to keep humanity in ignorance, where the first sin, according to that interpretation, is the eating of the tree of knowledge. Whereas in Gnosticism, according to the hypostasis of the archons, it says this. Here we go. It says, their chief is blind. Because of his power and his ignorance and his arrogance, he said with his power, it is I who am God. There is none apart from me. When he said this, he sinned against the entirety. And this speech got up to incorruptibility. Then there was a voice that came forth from the incorruptibility saying, you are mistaken, Samael, which is God of the blind. So the blind God, the God of the blind. So essentially what is happening here is that the God of the Bible, the creator God, the chief archon said, I am God, and there is none apart from me. And a voice from the realm of divine light said, you are mistaken, Samael, God of the blind. You are wrong. You are incorrect. So it says here, why does it say? It says, it is I who am God, there is none apart from me. When he said this, he sinned against the entirety. Now, why is this a sin against the entirety? What is this sin? What is the relevance of the sin? What is the importance of the sin? What does this mean? Well, this God, by declaring itself the only God, what that of course does is strips everyone else of their divinity. Because if you are the only God, you are ipso facto saying, well, there is no other God. And therefore, this is a sin against the entirety. It's the sin because we are all sparks of divine light. We are all emanations from the divine one, according to Gnosticism. So for this being to say, I am the only God, there is no God but me, this is a sin against the totality. It is the sin against what it says here. He sinned against the entirety, the union, the divine nature of all existence. So you see here, there's nothing wrong with claiming divinity. What is the sin is saying that you are the only divinity and there is no divinity but you. In fact, in another Gnostic text on the origin of the world, there is a spiritual human before the material human is created, and this spiritual human is more powerful than the God of the Bible. And all the archons go up to the God of the Bible, the creator God, Yaldabaoth, Samael, the blind God. They all go up to him and they go, hey, if you are the only God, what is this God that is creating works and worlds and heavens better than you? So in that book, they acknowledge the divinity of humanity in its spiritual essence. And of course, then this is where they create a body and try to entice it to get into the body, to trap it and ensnare it, because essentially that's their goal, is to ensnare the beings of light. So this sin committed by God is the sin of declaring its own divinity while stripping everyone else of their divinity. And the plan of Samael, God of the blind, Yaldabaoth, is to keep humanity in ignorance from realizing what their truth is about themselves, realizing that they are divine, so that they go on believing that God is the one true God. Now, what's important about this is what it represents. You see, in modern Christianity, our battle being against not flesh and blood, but the principalities and the authorities, is about, the devil and the demons trying to sin and tempt us to drink beer and have sex before marriage or something. That's what it's the sin of, modern Christianity, devil and the demons trying to tempt you to do sinful things. However, in this version, no. In this version, the dark rulers are the forces of ignorance that keep you from realizing what you are. So you can understand this in a symbolic way, not as a literal being named Yaldabaoth that is actually out there trying to keep humanity enslaved, but rather the forces of ignorance in general that keeps one enslaved. So you can even understand this in terms of modern Christianity. In terms of modern Christianity, the stories in the Bible, they're not true. But what are they? They are a force and a power of ignorance. They keep humanity in a state of not realizing they're divine. It doesn't matter if the creator God doesn't actually exist, but by people believing that, there is only one true God and no other God but that God, then it strips them of their divinity. They're taught that knowledge is the first and worst sin, where in Gnosticism, the first and worst sin is committed by the being that declares itself to be God and takes away your divinity. So the sin of the blind God, the first sin, is a sin of ignorance. It says, in his ignorance and in his arrogance, he declared himself to be the true, the only God and no other God but him. And doing so, he sinned against the authority, and the voice from the realm of divine light came down and said, you are mistaken, Samael, God of the blind. So we can understand that Christianity is actually a false light. Christianity is a form of ignorance, a force of darkness and a force of ignorance that keeps humanity from realizing their true nature. That's twisted the message of Jesus Christ. It's twisted the message of so many of the great individuals that came forth that ended up being declared heretics. I mean, it didn't twist their message. They just simply condemned them as heretics and eliminated them. So Christianity has completely twisted the message of Christ and has completely been transformed into a false light and a force of darkness and ignorance. Now, here's the idea that's very interesting. I want to switch over real quick to an article written by Benjamin Cain on medium.com. Okay, so I want to, he has some very insightful things to say here. So this is from Benjamin Cain on medium.com, and the title of this article is called "Who Punishes God for Experimenting with Sentient Life?" And if you like some of the quotes that I read here, go check out Benjamin Cain on medium.com, give him a follow and support him over there. Now, this is very interesting to think about. Cain is asking the question, does God experiment with us, and should God be punished for experimenting with sentient life? And it's this interesting idea that God is actually committing atrocious sins, sins that are terrible. And it says, right here, Benjamin says, the wages of sin is death, says St. Paul in Romans 6:23, but who holds God accountable for having set up the test? So essentially, it's this idea of why would God create essentially this sort of cosmic torture chamber where people are having to do all of these tests and avoid all this sin, where eventually they're condemned to hell to be tortured and burned for all eternity. Cain is essentially bringing up the idea that God should be held accountable for this cruel and unjust experiment. And it says, evidently God gets a pass because as a sovereign, he's above the law. As Paul says in Romans 9, does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for special purposes and some for common use? And I grew up in a strict, again, indoctrinated, and this was brought up a lot as well. All right, so what are they talking about here? They're talking about a potter creating pottery in any way that the potter wants to. So this is an analogy for God. God is the potter, and the clay is people and the material world and creation in general. So this is often brought up a lot when people bring up injustices or things that seem wrong in the world. It's like, why does God allow this to happen? What's going on here? How come, some people are born into poverty, other into riches, some with disabilities and others not, et cetera, et cetera. And what's usually said is, well, God is the potter and God can mold the clay however he wishes. So basically, like, don't question the potter. The potter can do whatever it wants with its creation. And you see that very disgusting attitude that's prevalent in Christianity, in that we're nothing but things that God can manipulate, and we're so much lesser than God. We're God's playthings. We're God's weird experiment. Now, Benjamin brings up a great point and says, sure, the potter can do what he wants with clay, but pottery is subject to aesthetic standards, not moral ones. In other words, pottery is about art, not about morality. If pottery were alive and the potter were to abuse those creations, such as by deceiving and cruelly testing them, we'd no longer take for granted the pious contention that the potter is a good and holy creator. So that's an excellent, fabulous point brought up by Cain, Benjamin Cain here, in saying that, yeah, sure, the potter can do whatever he wants, but that's because the potter a potter is working with clay. If that clay were alive, and then the potter were to abuse those creations and deceive them and be cruel to them, then we should hold that being accountable. So he's saying that, hey, this analogy doesn't match up here. Pottery is pottery. It's about art. It's about creating, pieces of expression. It's not a living entity. And Cain continues here by saying, where then is God's accountability for having made a potentially flawed natural order, one in which religious faith might indeed be tied to earthly consequences, given the pragmatic standards we mortals need to do the best we can under these imperfect circumstances. So basically, who's holding God accountable for creating this weird, sick experiment? Because if you take Christianity at face value, it's a weird, sick experiment. God created these beings, but made it incredibly difficult to know that if he is God or not, and subjects them to eternal damnation if they make the wrong choice or screw up or don't believe in a specific thing. He apparently gives them free will, but if they exercise free will, they're tortured for eternity. It's a madhouse. It's a sick experiment. And Cain is saying, hey, who's going to hold accountable? Who's going to hold God accountable for this? And this reflects Gnosticism very well, because Gnosticism talks about how this earth is a prison and hell, and is basically, yes, an experiment by this creator God to try and trap souls into matter. And Cain says, the point is that reason has little to do with religiosity or spirituality. In theology, stories matter more than arguments, including stories that serve as conservative propaganda that shame us for asking for too many questions. And that's right. You know, that the pottery and the clay, the pottery and the potter is usually brought up when you start asking questions. It's like, oh, well, God can do what he wants with his creation. And that's really a sick you know, when you think that's such a gross attitude. It's like I'm kind of used to it because I grew up with it. But, you know, really acknowledging how sick that is to think that, oh, well, we're basically just God's property and he can do whatever the fuck he wants, even if it includes allowing us to be tortured for eternity. That's crazy. And Cain makes the point and says that reason, the ability to rationalize, has little to do with religion. In religious matters, stories matter more than arguments. And that's exactly true. It's like, oh, well, instead of giving you a rational argument as to why certain things happen in the world, let's give a story about a potter and clay. And this is, you know, you can see this time and time again, where morality and ethical standards are not tied to reasoning and care and empathy, but rather stories in the Bible, the teachings of Christ or the apostles, when they've actually been very, very twisted. The true message of Christ is great. The true message of Christ is to look within and realize your divinity. But this has been incredibly twisted by the church to mean something completely different. So the idea here is that God, according to Cain, should be held accountable for this. Now, of course, what we want to understand here is that, look, I mean, everyone's free to believe what they want to believe, but these beings don't actually exist. They stand in for the very real battle that we are having right now. Now, the material world is an illusion. The material world is not the ultimate true reality. The ultimate true reality is a metaphysical domain, a domain of frequency, a domain of energy, a domain of mind. And our goal is to realize that we are that energy. Every single one of us is an eternal mind, or what we call a zeta, a collection of that frequency collections. And so we're eternal minds, we're eternal souls, we're eternal zetas, and we are experiencing this realm of matter through our bodies. Now, it's not like we've been trapped here by an evil creator God, but we are trapped in a lower state of consciousness due to forces of ignorance. So it's the forces of ignorance, things like religion, mainstream Christianity, that keep us from realizing what we really are, realizing that we are divine. And when we realize what we realize we are divine, this world doesn't have to be so sick and disgusting anymore. We can transform it. We can build the kingdom of heaven here on earth. That is what Christ says in the once banned Gospel of Thomas. And in that book as well, that book, the main secret of the Gospel of Thomas is talking about how we are, every single one of us is the all. We together are the all. We are sons of the living Father. We are beings of divine light, and we are the light, and we have come from the light. And the kingdom of God is not in the sea. It's not in the sky. It's not someplace when you go to die. It's within you and all around you, meaning it's a state of mind, and this world is a world where we can actualize it right here and right now. So this world actually isn't a hellish place. It only seems like it because that is what has happened due to the actions of humanity in this world. So what can we take away from this? We can take away from this and realize that the first and worst sin is not knowledge. That is actually the first step towards liberation, and it's something that should be celebrated. No, the first and worst sin is the sin of ignorance. So you see the difference here. Mainstream Christianity, first and worst sin, knowledge. According to Gnosticism and the hypostasis of the archons, this particular book, according to this book, what's the first sin? Ignorance. In ignorance, a being claimed itself that it was the only God and tried to strip the divinity of all of the entirety. It sinned against the entirety in its ignorance as God of the blind. And now we, instead of being infected with, like in mainstream Christianity, oh, you're infected with the original sin, which is ridiculous. You think about that. According to mainstream Christianity, you're going to go to hell and be tortured for eternity because someone ate an apple. Now, of course, I'm simplifying things here. I know that we don't really know. It doesn't say that it wasn't actually an apple. It wasn't actually an apple. It's just a fruit, and it represents knowledge. I get all that, all right? But just think about how ridiculous. I'm trying to make a point. Think about how ridiculous that is. Everyone is going to be tortured for eternity because someone ate from some fruit. And ultimately, what that means is knowledge is declared the first and original sin. Whereas, contrary to that, the first and the worst sin is ignorance. And instead of all of us being infected by the sin of knowledge, according to mainstream Christianity, rather, we are all infected by the sin of ignorance. That is, we are all born into ignorance. We are all born into darkness. So we're not born into sin because someone ate from some apple. We're born into ignorance because we need to grow and learn and realize what we are. And how do we do that? Through gnosis, through knowledge. So it's actually knowledge that is the antidote for ignorance. So it's not about sin and salvation. It's about knowledge and ignorance. We're all born into ignorance. We're all born into darkness, but we can overcome that and realize our divinity and realize what we truly are by looking within through knowledge, through reflective thought, through epinoia, as they call it in Gnosticism, meaning purposeful thinking. All of it is related to understanding our divine truth, understanding what we truly are. And then we can do anything. We're co-creators of this world. We can transform it into whatever we want. So don't let anyone tell you that the sin, the first sin, the ultimate sin is knowledge. No, the first and the worst sin is ignorance. This is about ignorance versus knowledge, not sin and salvation. This is ignorance versus knowledge. And we can overcome the ignorance of this dark world and create a beautiful, illuminated world. And we can do that by coming together. That's all we have to do. All we have to do is spread information, spread knowledge. You see how important this is. The world is infected with ignorance. How do we cure ignorance? Through knowledge, through gnosis. That's why spreading information is so important. People often ask me, like, how do we change the world? How do we do it? Spreading information, knowledge. These are catalysts to help humanity reach a higher consciousness. And when humanity reaches a higher consciousness, a new world will unfold from that, because it's a natural extension of a higher consciousness. You reach a higher consciousness and you're automatically going to want to create an inclusive, cohesive, united world. If one reaches a true state of hyper-awareness, which is very difficult to reach, but if one reaches a true state of hyper-awareness, our collectivity and connection and interconnection is understood, known, and felt. And thus we create a world based on that, a planetary civilization, a teleocratic, purposeful existence. All right, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. I have so many more playlists on the reality of the rulers and the tripartite tractate, on the origin of the world. Check out my playlist, check out my videos. There's a ton of information on there. And please like and subscribe. And as always, hey, if you enjoy what I do and you want to see this information spread and you want to see this channel grow and help me create bigger and better videos, consider supporting over on Patreon. And you'll get access to all of our members-only videos. There's a new members-only videos every single week. That's a lot of content. And we're having a members-only video right now, right after this video, called The Secret of Sleep. Why do we sleep? We're going to be talking about sleep, dream, and consciousness, what it is. So you can get access to all our members-only videos by supporting on patreon.com/MorgueOfficial. Here's the URL there. Or tier 2 or higher right here on YouTube by hitting the join button right below this video. And always remember, hey, this isn't church, so don't feel obligated to support monetarily. You don't have to. Only do so if you feel good about it and you can afford it. But there are plenty of free ways you can support, like liking, subscribing, and sharing. That being said, I do appreciate those who support very much. It means a lot. I want to give a big shout out to everyone, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, the Halloween Mom, DB, Enki, Nusalina, Paul Rogers, Eric, Massam, Christopher Smith, and everyone else. Thank you very much.